Welcome everyone. We're delighted to co-host this funding workshop with our partners at ERA. Building on yesterday's reverse pitch sessions, today's panel will take you on a deeper dive to learn from expert reviewers at ERA and Alberta Innovates. As the province's innovation engine, we're seeing the impact of COVID-19 pandemic in every region of the world and every sector of the economy. Unlike prior health and economic crisis, no aspect of life or business is left untouched. This pandemic is teaching us all very important lessons. First, the speed and scope of this outbreak is unprecedented. Response plans were dramatically different worldwide, and re-entry plans are now evolving, being adapted for local customs and the rolling reality of regional markets. Second, companies and industries become hyper-aware of vulnerabilities in global supply chains, from groceries to medical supplies, but still the disruptions to commerce and logistics is a tremendous opportunity for tech companies today. Third, collaboration brought down silos and brought together diverse players. Problems were solved faster than ever. New ways of gaining ground as companies, countries, and communities to focus on building back better. There is no doubt clean tech is key to what and how society will move forward, both at the neighborhood level and globally. That's what makes this workshop both timely and very relevant. Experts will offer advice and tips to help put your best funding applications forward, including the ancillary benefits of your research ideas and entrepreneurial stories. I know innovation isn't new to many of you. It may have been your bread and butter for years, or is in your nature to look beyond the obvious to find solutions and future market opportunities. Creating and commercializing clean technologies and knowledge products is the key to what's next for Alberta. As Suncor CEO Mark Little and I noted in a joint column not long ago, disruption breeds opportunity. Companies and countries are stepping up their game in response to this pandemic. Partners such as Suncor and Enercam, who are converting municipal garbage into biofuels, show how expertise from very different sectors can be pooled to accelerate and scale clean tech for domestic and export markets. Canada has all the ingredients to win at the world stage, and Alberta figures prominently in that equation. Oil and gas is one of the biggest investors and markets for clean tech in Canada. Alberta is home to a huge bitumen reserve, the feedstock uniquely suited for advanced manufacturing and materials. Carbon fiber, activated carbon, and asphalt binders alone could be worth a mere $84 billion annually. So think big. Now is the time for clean tech and resource companies to combine forces and unlock value in growth markets where Canada holds a competitive edge. As we emerge from COVID-19 crisis, clean tech innovators will be present in every sector, from energy and smart ag to health and logistics. While we can't predict the future, we can leverage industry know-how and infrastructure already in place, and we can definitely shape it. With that, I'll hand the rest of the morning over to Brian Helfenbaum from our Clean Resource team. Enjoy your day.
Okay, thank you, Laura, and good morning, everyone. I am Brian Helfenbaum. I am the Executive Director of Advanced Hydrocarbons with Alberta Innovates, and it is my privilege to be the MC for today's event. So similar job to Bob Savage from yesterday, albeit with less hair. So the topic is lessons learned from expert reviewers. Alberta Innovates has partnered with ERA to provide tips and tricks to submitting proposals. People have had different experience and different outcomes dealing with this process, and indeed there can be frustration from both sides of the proposal. So we'll spend the next hour talking about a variety of topics. There'll be three main areas. We'll talk about lessons learned, communication of environmental, economic, and ancillary benefits, and then telling your story. And then we've provided ample time for Q&A. For the Q&A, you'll notice that the Q&A button that was there yesterday is not there now. We're going to use the more public chat button. And this is to try to have a bit more of a dialogue so you can see what questions are being asked, so we're not repetitive and you can add on. Just make sure when you are submitting questions that you select all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see it. And please feel free to ask anytime during the session. We'll wait until the end to address them, but rather than forget what you wanted to ask, please do so. We are going to move at a fast pace. We've only got 10 minutes for each speaker. And finally, note that this is being recorded for quality assurance and training purposes, and also to be posted where you can access this again. So without further ado, let's get started. So our first session is Lessons Learned from Alberta Funders. We have with us two experts, Vicki Lightbrown from Alberta Innovates. She's the director for the Water Innovation Program. And prior to joining AI, Vicki worked for CH2M Hill as a project manager for upstream oil and gas and petrochemical remediation projects. Joining Vicki is Chris Outram from Emissions Reduction Alberta. Chris is a clean technology project specialist with ERA and is the primary contact person for applicant support for ERA's open competitions that many of you are familiar with. Chris has a broad experience base in conventional and renewable power generation, energy storage research, hydrogen fuel cells, and energy system modeling. So with that, let's turn it over to Vicki and Chris.
Thanks, Brian, and good morning, everybody. Between Chris and I, we probably have seen over hundreds of proposals. So from our experience, we put together a list of 14 tips and tricks that we hope will help you be successful through the application process. It'll be a bit quick fire, so hopefully you can keep up. So tip number 1 is meeting eligibility requirements does not guarantee funding. Eligibility requirements are what is used as a screening tool to make sure that you are eligible to be considered for funding. They're not used by the evaluation team to score a project. So meeting the requirements means you can apply, but not necessarily mean that you have a strong proposal. Once you know you are eligible, it really helps to make sure you understand the intent and overarching goals for the the organization you're applying to. Emphasize how your project excels in moving towards those goals. It really helps if your proposal can be strong in all areas to be successful.
Okay, and building on that, we'll have tip number 2, which is read the guidelines and application template in their entirety. This seems like a simple one, but it's one that the evaluation teams can really tell which applicants are quite familiar with the application materials and which applicants are not. What we've done at our funding organizations is design our templates to source the information that we need in order to make our funding decisions. And so we strongly encourage you to follow along with the bullets and the questions that are asked in those templates, and even consider using those bullets as headings in your proposal in order to make sure that you're giving the review team as much information as possible. There might be a lot of amazing things you want to tell us about your technology and your project, but if you don't answer some of those basic questions, given that the reviewers are going to be seeing dozens of proposals all using the same template, that could put you at a disadvantage right away.
So tip number 3, plan your proposals. Once you've read through your guidelines, read through the proposal, put together a plan. Don't simply fill it out from start to finish. Read through the entire application, see which sections are priority. Some might be weighted higher. Address those sections first, similar to how you would fill out a final exam. You want to do the questions that have the highest weighting. We often see applicants that will fill it out start to finish, and when they get to the end, they're running out of space, they're running out of time, and so those last sections are not addressed as well, and that can be to your disadvantage. So really plan a narrative, plan your proposal, it can really help to build an overarching narrative for your proposal that will leave evaluators with that strong image of what the project will achieve, how it will do it, and how this translates into larger benefits.
Okay, tip number 4. So in the same vein of talking about larger benefits, it's very important to balance what you're discussing in your proposal between a discussion of the project that you're proposing, as well as the big picture. A common mistake that we see is that some folks might spend their entire proposal talking about the big picture and how exciting the market and the commercialization for the potential for their technology is, and then forget to give us critical details about the project. Or vice versa, they might get down into the weeds of the individual pieces of the project and the technology and all the exciting stuff there, and forget to tell us where the technology is going after the project. So balancing those two, communicating where the project fits into that big picture and how the project will advance the technology is very important. But at the end of the day, keep in mind that our due diligence when we're reviewing proposals is mainly focused on the project itself. And so make sure that you're nailing that aspect of the proposal and then moving on to painting the picture of where the long-term outcomes might be.
So tip number 5, highlight the value of your process and your solution. The evaluation team will have a scientific and business background, but they may not be experts in your specific field. So you really need to explain how your process works. What are the little boxes inside that big black box that you call your technology? But make sure you don't get down into the weeds. So it is a bit of a balance of providing us the detail, explaining the benefits of your technology without getting too specific. Don't assume that we know how a specific type of process works or the benefits are self-explanatory. With that in mind, it's really important to justify any claims that you make. Just because a solution is patented or the science is sound doesn't mean it will work as well as advertised.
Okay, tip number 6, know your competition and tell us what you know about your competition. I think one thing we see some applicants do is get a little bit skittish or a little bit afraid of talking about their competition too much because they're trying to focus on the benefits of their technology and they don't want the review team to know too much about the competition. In reality, the review team probably already knows about the competition. Like Vicky said, they are subject matter experts. And so if your proposal comes in and says, oh, we have no competitors, there's no one that does what we do, there's no solution for this, that can typically be a bit of a red flag. Even in a situation where you have a transformative technology that's coming out of nowhere and completely solving an issue, there must be some current baseline of practice. And so it's really important to be specific, name names, and show how your technology and solution represents an improvement over the incumbents, over the existing solutions, over other folks that might be trying to develop new technologies. I think a really good way to look at it is that if you do your competitive analysis right, it's actually an opportunity to showcase the strength of your technology rather than something to be afraid of, showcasing your competitors. So keep that in mind when working on that part of your proposal.
So tip number 6, focus on your market or your application. Similar to how we said, know your competition, know your market. Pick one, the first one that you're going to go to market to, and we'll address and focus on. Use this same market and application throughout your proposal as you talk to all the benefits. For example, use the same market for your competitive analysis when you're comparing your application to the status quo, as Chris mentioned. You can touch on the broader market potential and application for your solution, but only as an indication of potential future growth. Avoid confusion and muddying the waters by saying that you can do everything. Just pick that one and really focus on it.
Okay, tip number 8, demonstrate knowledge of the Alberta context. This is a bit specific to Emissions Reduction Alberta and Alberta Innovates, given we are Alberta funders, but I think it can apply to any funding organization to sort of know your target audience. Our funding programs for ERA and AI are particularly obviously focused at benefits for Alberta. And so it's really important that you as the applicant demonstrate your familiarity with Alberta, the local regulatory environment, the needs of the local market, the unique challenges that market players here might face. And that's particularly true if you're an applicant that's coming from outside the province and applying to our funding programs here. So really make sure that you're providing that clear line of sight to future adoption and economic benefits in Alberta and demonstrating that you know what you're talking about when it comes to the potential for adoption of your technology here in the province.
So for tip number 9, we're going to continue to build on that importance of line of sight. Having potential benefits is a really good start, but reviewers tend to be more impressed if they can see a clear path from now to getting to those benefits. If there's a really big valley of death between now and then, it becomes the question of, is that risk too big to overcome in the near future? The vision for where the technology or research will go and how this grant investment that you're applying for can help is a really critical narrative to include in your proposal.
Tip number 10, engage with end users and partners as early on in the process as you can. We find that proposals that have a lot of support from partners, have a lot of partners already at least engaged and in discussion or ideally confirmed, tend to be a lot stronger than those that are a bit earlier in that process. Obviously, we understand that partners might not be able to fully commit to a project at the time of application, but even an indication of interest from them can be quite helpful. The other thing to think about is that market participants, industry partners, technology partners, all of those can help validate and demonstrate demand and market pull for your solution. So incorporating their perspectives into your proposal can actually help you tell the best possible story.
So tip number 11 is a term that I kind of coined, is be optimistically realistic. So we do want to hear how great your technology or your solution is, but any claim you make on performance, market potential, benefits should be really grounded in reality, not pie in the sky. We can solve, do everything. It's actually surprising how often we see these really grand, large claims. It's okay to provide your best case scenario. You want to put your best foot forward, but consider providing a range of potential outcomes if the application allows, that show that you're accounting for the large amount of uncertainty and risk that comes with research projects.
Along the same lines, we have tip number 12, which is be honest. And this is a general comment about anytime you're talking about risk or uncertainty in your proposal, please just be forthright. You know, our evaluators understand that no project has everything ironed out and in perfect order at the time of application. And ultimately, our business is investing in risky and uncertain projects. So don't let the presence of risk stop you from providing a complete narrative in your proposal. Be forthright about the gaps and challenges that lie ahead with your technology. That's what we want to know about in order to understand if our investment has an opportunity to make a real difference. And in some cases, if you're upfront about the risks and about things that you see as challenges in the future, our funding organizations and our experts might actually be able to provide solutions or at least suggestions to help with those risks. So it can only be a benefit.
Tip number 13, second last one here, avoid marketing jargon. Our reviewers are technical and business expertise and are looking for projects where there is opportunity to solve a problem. This really should be looked at as an internal assessment, not a sales pitch or an investment pitch. We really want to know the reality of the project. So it really builds on that being honest thing, is provide the reality of the project. Don't hide, ignore, sugarcoat issues. Reviewers will pick up on this. As mentioned in tip 12, it's much better to be forthright, present a solution for risks rather than giving that slick, perfect sales pitch. We want to know the real project.
Okay, and that brings us to our last tip of the day, which I think is a great place to end on. Tip 14, don't be afraid to reach out. Evaluators can often tell the difference between proposals that have engaged with the funder prior to application and those that haven't. And so all of our organizations have folks like myself and folks like Vicky who've seen hundreds of these proposals, have evaluated dozens or hundreds of these proposals. And so we're more than happy to provide our perspective and provide our advice in advance of your proposal while you're working on it. The entire process is confidential, so don't be worried about sharing any information ahead of time. You know, we don't make our decisions based on draft or early materials that are submitted. So if you do have questions about the criteria, about the guidelines, about how to develop these narratives and lines of sight that we've been talking about, please feel free to reach out, and we are more than happy to help you in putting your best possible proposal forward. So with that, thanks for everybody's time, and look forward to the panel discussion.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vicky and Chris. That was a lot of information delivered very well and very quickly. Reminder to folks to please submit your questions through the chat. The chat is not a great place to be submitting pitches about your projects, but if there is a nuance or a question that relates to, okay, I have a pitch I want to make, and I'm not sure the best way to make it, right? So that's what we're trying to tackle today, is how we can do it. So please do go ahead and submit your questions there. So we're going to move on to our second speaker, moving at lightning speed here. Ted Bell is going to be talking about the communicating environmental, economic, and ancillary benefits. Ted is with PricewaterhouseCoopers. He is an expert on grants and incentives, as well as the firm's leader on GHG and offset project verification. He has nearly 30 years of industry and consulting experience and has helped clients apply for funding in innovation, and including programs like SHRED. Over to you, Ted.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Brian, and good morning, everyone. And what I'm going to do here is build a little bit on what we heard from Vicky and Chris. And most of the examples and things I'm going to talk about are drawn from live experiences helping proponents apply for various programs across the country. So let's get into it, and we're going to cover 3 areas: environmental, economic, and some of the ancillary benefits that, that you want to talk about in your projects and how to communicate them. So starting with the environmental area, a little bit of a focus on ERA and the carbon side of things with my comments this morning. When you are looking to quantify carbon in your project and establish the benefits and communicate them, you do want to try and use established quantification methodologies where they are available to make those quantifications more robust. And there are a number of places where you can get these types of things. Specifically in Alberta, we would look to areas like the Alberta Offset System, or more broadly, globally, there's the VCS or CDM protocols that are out there. Now, these are offset project quantification methodologies, but the calculations that you find in the various protocols can be very useful in helping you quantify carbon benefits that you get out of your projects. Baselining is an important area to think about, and sometimes we see simple approaches here which are more historical in nature, but it might be more appropriate to think more about a dynamic baseline, for example, when you're quantifying carbon, so that things like your productivity aren't influencing the reduction that you are actually going to get from a project. And finally, it's surprising to see how much emission factors actually change over time as science evolves. And what we find is the robustness of the calculations are generally better supported if you find references that include the most up-to-date emission factors for the calculations that you're using. Secondly, and this could apply to anything more than carbon, other things in your project, but sometimes we see that that proponents don't spend enough time on how they're going to actually measure in the future what the performance of a project is. And you do want to be looking at this quite closely in a carbon context, because you need to be able to demonstrate that those benefits will be there down the road. This means having a good look at exactly how you plan to collect the data, at what frequency, and how you will compare that data to the baseline that you previously established in your project. And sometimes also overlooked, and this is drawn out of a lot of basic carbon offset projects and quantification, is that the calibration and maintenance of the devices themselves that are involved in getting your data are actually worth spending a little bit of time on. And finally, you could call these the ancillary environmental benefits, I suppose, but some of the other benefits that might come with a project that are associated with carbon. Sometimes the projects are all about this, but these can be harder to quantify than carbon, because there are fewer available quantification methods out there that are as robust. But it would be important to attempt to quantify some of these things if you can. And that if there are effects on air, water, and other nature-based areas, that the benefits that you're talking about are consistent with the project that you're implementing. So you do want to try and communicate how important those are as a part of the project. And one thing that we do see is the idea of biodiversity is becoming more and more important, as initially as an ancillary environmental benefit, but more and more as a primary benefit to some projects. So that's worth thinking about as well. Switching now to the economic benefits, and generally this is an important area that I would say is under communicated in a lot of projects, and proponents tend to want to focus quite strongly on the project themselves and not necessarily as much on the benefits. And we heard that in the prior session, and that is an important tip, is that you do want to make sure that you're creating a high enough focus on the benefits of a project versus talking about the details of the project itself. So in this slide, we're talking about how to do that from an economic perspective. And one of the important parts, and certainly true today in COVID world, is the temporal nature of the economic benefits that are going to be there. So What are the immediate ones, for example, construction jobs in a project, and what are the more long-term economic effects? So how many permanent jobs might there be as a result of a project? And you also want to talk about the innovation and market aspects of your project, in the sense that what does it do for Canadian competitiveness and the products that we will make, and the services that we will provide, and how that will help drive Canadian productivity and ultimately Canadian jobs in the future. So you do want to spend time on those aspects. On the economic side, very often we see less depth than I think a lot of the granting agencies would like to see. And one of the ways that you can get more depth is by working through a multiplier and doing a little bit of math on trying to figure out how many dollars impact does every dollar spent have on the broader economy. And that kind of economic analysis can be done by examining a project and figuring out, for example, what tertiary jobs and in what other industries might be created, and how much economic activity will ensue from a project. The other aspect of a multiplier is the technology itself that is the subject of the project. How much will it be picked up by the rest of the industry? And even more broadly, is it a technology that can be applied to other industries and have a broader economic effect down the road? And finally, not specifically on the benefits side, but this has a little bit more to do with project execution and the fact that granting agencies do want to make sure the money, is active and gets in the ground. So you want to spend some time talking about the various project risks that might be out there. Those can be the technology itself, whether or not it will be successful. Sometimes construction labor is difficult to get. Is the financial backing sufficient for the organization? And a big part of this is also the team that will be working on the project, and do they have the background and competency that when you assess it would lead to a view that the project is going to be executable with a reasonable amount of success. And you can do some of this with risk analysis, and some of the stronger analyses would actually show a detailed risk matrix that would try to put some calculation around those types of mitigation plans. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the ancillary benefits for the last couple of minutes here. And I've divided these into broader societal benefits and narrower community-based ones, and then also a bit about diversity. So when you're thinking about the societal benefits, you're trying to understand what your project will do in the broader context. It's a little bit like the economic analysis, but here you might want to talk more around things like public health issues or public education, and your partnerships with universities and educational institutions. There are projects, for example, that will create district energy systems, or perhaps roads or waste processing, for example, that will benefit the entire society and community. Sometimes these are difficult to quantify, and they wind up being a little more qualitative in nature, but keeping in mind that the grantors and funders are interested in broad overall impact, they're worth talking about. And diversity these days seems to be continuously growing and becoming more diverse, I guess, is a way to say it. And there are the traditional ones that most of us think about around Indigenous involvement and gender, and those are big themes in Canada right now with a lot of our funding systems. But you'd also want to consider, for example, the breadth of the job creation that would exist across various industries and types of jobs. And you can also think about more ancillary groups and interest groups, for example, at-risk youth, and how your project might affect those types of things. There's multiple examples there. But it is an important aspect of communication of your project benefits. And finally, on the community side, you do want to look at the geography that your project is being executed in. We do, particularly in Canada, we have a lot of small communities, and some of these projects will have very, very large impacts on what's going on in the local communities. So how will the work that you are doing actually support the continued existence of those groups and community activities? And now we're getting down to things like schools and sports groups and parks, and although they might not be as large as the societal impacts, they can be important, particularly in small communities. So that's where I'm going to stop, and I'm looking forward to the broader discussion, and hopefully these sort of detailed experiences can help you think about how you're going to write your projects. Thanks, Brian.
All right, thank you, Ted. You are exactly on time. I did not have to cue the orchestra. Nice work. We're getting some fantastic questions, so thank you. We will address as many as we can. We've tried to leave ample opportunity. So without further ado, our final speaker to talk about telling your story in a meaningful way is Michelle Gurney from Emissions Reduction Alberta. Michelle leads the communications team at ERA and has a passion for storytelling and has been helping her clients share their stories for more than 25 years. Today, she'll share a short excerpt from her storytelling workshop series. Michelle.
Thanks, Brian. I'm just going to get you to flip that slide back for me there. I just want to show a quote here. So I don't know if anybody in the audience was at Energy Disruptors last year and had the chance to see Malcolm Gladwell, but he said this. And when he said this, it really resonated with me because since I've been working in the innovation space, I've realized that every technology or innovation has a thrilling story behind it. But when Malcolm said this, he was actually referring to all the new tools that we have available to us to share our stories through social media, podcasts, we've got YouTube. Some people maybe want to share on TikTok. I don't know about that, but we've got all these great new tools. But we also have so many new methods and tools to help us shape our stories. And I'm just going to give you an overview of what I'll talk about today on the next slide. So today I am going to share a few tips on how to shape your technology story to help secure the funding you're looking for. But I just want to point out that when it comes to storytelling, there are really two things you need to be mindful of. And Chris and Vicky have highlighted a lot of these things already, but I'm going to take you a little bit into the layers of how to do that well. We need to really think hard about who we're talking to, need to do a good audience analysis, and we need to think hard about how we connect with those audiences. As Brian was saying, I do storytelling workshops, and these can span multiple days. I'm going to spend just 10 minutes taking you through what I think are the most important highlights, and I'm going to talk a little bit about framing. I'm going to, as I said, get really clear on how to define your audience. I'm going to outline some questions that can help you work through that process. And then I'm going to show you a methodology that can help you get really clear on your value proposition. So let's just take a look at this next slide here. So as a communicator, as Brian said, I've been a communications professional for more than 25 years. I'm just so interested in how people think and feel and how they react to different narratives. And a few weeks ago, I was reading this article in Psychology Today, and I came across a really great example on framing. And you can see this on the screen here. Now, imagine you have cancer, or somebody in your family has cancer, and the doctor says that that person or yourself, you have a 70% chance of living if you have surgery. Now imagine, just look at the next slide, the doctor says this. You have a 30% chance of dying if you have this surgery. So this question was studied with patients in a hospital, and every group, from students to doctors to patients, every group was much more likely to choose the surgery if it was explained in terms of how likely they were to live. So again, it's the same content, different framing, different outcome. So let's look at another one that's more relevant to the work that we're doing together. On this one, it says, industry is causing climate change. And on the next slide, emissions are causing climate change. Again, same content, different framing, different outcome. Society understands the world through different language, different lenses, and different frames. And it's really important for us to take time to consider how we're framing our technology. We need to be sure that we've set the context in a way that the reviewers, as Vicky and Chris were talking about, can understand. And remember, some of those reviewers come from a really technical background and others not so much. So let's take a look at the next slide, because how we frame things really does matter. One of the biggest flaws that I see when people start their writing process is they begin to think about what they need to say. And often, even at ERA, we do start there. What do we need to say to people? And we can answer that question first, but we really do need to make a shift and step back and say, what do we think people need to hear? So let's take a look at the next series of questions here. I've developed a series of questions that can help you think through where your story should really begin. So sometimes when we look at the applications, you can get a little bit confused as to where the start of the story is. And so if you go through this process, this can help you become a little bit more clear on where you should really start. So when you think about this, the first question is, who are they? As Vicki said, those expert reviewers come from a different range of backgrounds and they have a different range of experience. And it's important to think about that before you start your writing process. Who might they be? As Chris said, don't hesitate to reach out. You can ask those questions to really get a better understanding of who are the types of people who will be reading and assessing my application. How do I know what they're going to need to hear about and how much background they're going to need to understand my technology or innovation and how that's going to work? So the next question you ask yourself is, what do you think they already know about the topic? As Chris said, how much do they know about the market? How much do they know or understand about your competitors and the context? And then the next question is really important. What do they know for sure? And this is so important because this is what will help you narrow down when you actually go through the process of going to, what do I think they know, to what do they know for sure? Your answer is going to change. The next thing you want to do is ask yourself, what do you want your customer to do as a result of hearing your technology story? And in this case, your customer is that reviewer, okay? And then what do you want them to feel? And don't be ashamed to tell people what they should feel. Remember, you can use persuasive language to help people get a sense of what you're trying to do here. For instance, isn't this the best session you've been to in the virtual world over the last 3 months? So let's move to the next slide, please. So to answer all those audience questions really well, you do need to be really clear on your value proposition. And Chris and Vicki talked about this in terms of the big picture. And going through this process that I'm going to outline for you next will help you find the balance that they were talking about. Now, this involves thinking about your customer, the value that you create for them, and how your technology and innovation fits. So let's go to the next slide. I'm just going to tell you what you're going to see here. This is a really simple value proposition methodology. You can find this tool on strategizer.com, and if you look toward the bottom right of your screen, you'll see I've identified the name of that website. There's a whole bunch of value proposition methodologies or tools online. This is simply one of them. Strategizer does have an 8-hour course on how to work through a value proposition, or you can find explainer videos on YouTube if you just simply search value proposition. So what I want to do though is I'm just going to quickly explain this process to you and tell you how you can work through it. So a value proposition consists of 2 components. You've got your customer profile on the right and you've got your value map on the left. And you actually want to take yourself through that process. Now, you can do this individually if you're working on your own, but it's even better if you do this with a team. They don't have to have a great sense of your technology or innovation, but they can help you flesh out your thinking here. So the first thing you do is you work on the right-hand side of this, and that's your customer profile. The first thing you want to do is in that far right box. You want to identify and describe the jobs your customer is trying to get done. Now, those jobs can be functional. It can be about processing bitumen, recycling water, feeding cows, or they can be social. They need to be about impressing investors, or they can be emotional, gaining peace of mind. What are the jobs your customer is trying to do? The next thing you do is you move into the pains, that unhappy face in the bottom quadrant or the bottom component there. What is annoying your customer while they're trying to get their job done? What are the things that they're trying to avoid, like dissatisfaction with some existing solutions, frustrations or obstacles? What are they really trying to avoid? Flesh all of those out. You might come up with a whole bunch of them. The next thing, you move into the upper piece there, the gains. What are the positive outcomes that your customer is trying to achieve? What are the results and benefits they're looking for? What are their aspirations? Once you've got all that, you can move into the value side of this equation. But I should point out, you might do several customer profiles. If you have really different customers based on your technology or innovation, you might want to do multiple circles for those. As you move into your value map, the first thing you want to do is list the project or technologies, key services or features. Just list those all out on the left-hand side there. Then you want to identify how are those gain creators? How can your technology or innovation produce, increase, or maximize the outcomes and benefits that your customers expect or will be surprised by? The other thing you want to do is identify the pain relievers, how they eliminate, how your products, services, or features eliminate, reduce, or minimize the pains your customer cares about. How will your technology or innovation make their lives easier? Using this method can help you get really clear on your value proposition. It can help you figure out what's really going to resonate with your customers and reviewers. You can test this with people you know and trust and keep refining it over and over. Your value proposition actually can evolve over time. And even at ERA, we're constantly looking at our value proposition and just making little tweaks to it. Okay, so let's move to my second to final slide here. One other thing I wanted to highlight for you today is that Candace Patton over at Alberta Innovates did write an opinion piece titled How to Share What You Do When It's Complicated. Now the piece appeared on JWN's news site, and I've put a link in my presentation here, which will be shared afterward. She does a really great job of summing up some of the content I've talked about here. I've just given you some tips on how to find tools that can help you take things down into the next level. So she says, basically, when you're writing your application, be clear about how your technology solution will work. Make sure, like Chris said, you provide enough technical information to describe your unique approach and why. But make sure, as Vicky said, this ties back to the opportunity you defined. Make sure you cover your big why. Be clear on how that solution is going to contribute to change and be really convincing. And finally, in my last slide here, if you've done all the things that I've outlined, and your technology story is going to have the meaning, and meaning is what's going to create connection with your reviewers. And that's it for me. Thanks, Brian.
Excellent. Thank you, Michelle. So we're going to clear off the slide deck and go to gallery view here so we can see our panelists and get ready with some questions. Chris, I think we'll need your camera on as well, if that's okay. So thank you very much. We've been getting lots of great questions. I'm trying to organize them accordingly. I'll start. There's one that didn't go to everyone. I think it just went to the panelists. And I think I'm interpreting it correctly. And maybe I'll jump in to let our panelists get comfortable. And it relates to getting feedback on failed proposals. And so not all agencies offer, but when they do, you know, if you are unfortunately getting a rejection letter for an application that you've submitted, you should always take the opportunity to get that feedback. You know, it may not be feedback you like or you want to hear, but it can be really valuable, right? It can be technical, it can be about the narrative, it can really help you improve your pitch for the next time. So, you know, when it's offered, you should definitely always take that opportunity. So I'm going to try to go through these questions now. Sorry, I'm in trouble with my screen. So first question for the panelists is, are there different weightings for different parts of the application? So just raise your hand if you'd like to speak to that one. I'm thinking either, okay, Chris?
Yeah, that's a fairly easy question to start, so I'm happy to take it. There absolutely are usually different weightings in our criteria in our applications. So depending on the funding agency you're applying to, there might be 3 or 4 or 5 different criteria off the start, and then more criteria as you move through the process. And typically we do try to weight them differently. And so part of what Vicky was talking about in one of her tips was, you know, look at the weightings of the different criteria and try to focus more on those. So for example, obviously for Emissions Reduction Alberta, we tend to put higher weighting on the GHG emissions benefits of the project, but it can be different for any different funding program. So always a good thing to look out for when you're reading through the template and the guidelines.
Thanks, Chris. Vicky?
I was just going to emphasize that the weighting will be outlined in the guidelines. So back to how important it is to go through that guideline and instruction document, the criteria we're looking at and the weighting should be listed there.
Okay, so maybe keep with you, Vicky. And the question relates to when to contact the funding agency. So how early should an entrepreneur be reaching out? Is it okay to have more of a brainstorming discussion as opposed to having a fully fleshed out project? And then on patents and trade secrets, you know, at what stage of the patent process should somebody be approaching AI or ERA?
Great question. So at least at Alberta Innovates and ERA, we welcome those brainstorming conversations. So reach out as soon as you have an idea that's starting to take shape. We're very willing to talk through those ideas and concepts and see how we can form it into a project that you could potentially apply with. At the very least, we might send you off with some ideas and some guidance, or we might say you're ready to come in and submit an application. But we can provide that guidance. It saves wasting time or wasted application if you're not quite ready. So it is really good to reach out as soon as you think you might be applying for funding. In terms of the patent, we've seen applications in all stages of patent application. It is a confidential process. As public funding agencies, we are required to show benefits back to the province at some point, but we recognize the importance of patenting and protecting the business of creating these new innovations. So we have provisions in place that if you're finished a project with us and you're not quite ready to go public, we can allow for that if you're demonstrating that you're going through the patent protection process. So come at any stage really is the guidance there.
Thanks, Vicky. Ted, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I wanted to add a practical comment from experience on that last question, is that reaching out is a really good idea, even if it's not clear that reaching out is available. And the reason for that is, in my experience, there are a lot of people talking about projects and whether or not they actually fit the program that they're looking at. And you might sometimes say even looking to squeeze a project into a program that it might not be perfect for. So making that phone call and just having that conversation and getting some feedback initially, in some cases actually can strengthen what you want to do there, but in other cases can actually help you avoid wasting a lot of time on something that may not bear fruit. So just wanted to add that I have seen that in action, and it's definitely worth considering.
Thanks, Ted. Let's bring Michelle in. So how do you deal with the problem of, dealing with reviewer who thinks they know something for sure, but it's actually incorrect, and getting past people's existing paradigms to tell them a story that may be contrary to their existing perceptions?
That is a complex question. I might ask Chris or Vicky to help me with that one. Brian, I just want to make sure I heard that correctly. Can you call that back to me one more time?
The question relates to something in your slides about, what is it that people know for sure? But what do you do when someone thinks they know something for sure, but it's actually incorrect or, based on old paradigms that are no longer valid, right? So how do you change somebody's paradigm?
Okay, that's a really good question. And like I said, I'll ask Vicky or Chris or anybody to jump in. I think the hard part is just giving enough explanation. So if there's a known belief that people, like, generally we believe everybody thinks this one thing, but there's this thing that's new that maybe people don't have a lot of education on. It's, from a communication perspective, you want to meet people where they already are. So if there's a perception around something that people know to be true, start there. You might think this, but it's actually evolved to this. So that's, I think, the best way that I can answer that quickly, Brian. And I see Chris nodding. Do you want to jump in on that, Chris?
Sure, Michelle, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's completely the right way to approach it. Our reviewers are experts, and they sometimes might have priors in their analysis. So I think it is important to start where people are and not jump out with really bold claims that might turn people off at first glance. So sort of easing folks into, if you are proposing a paradigm shift or you are trying to provide information on something that really represents a drastic departure from conventional knowledge or the current zeitgeist, I think it is really important to sort of ease folks into that and definitely provide backup and justification. So if you're making bold claims, you need that much stronger evidence to support that and to convince folks that that's the way to go. But we're obviously, again, in the business of innovation. And so when we see claims like that, we get excited more than anything. So try to feed into that and build it into a positive narrative rather than sort of a negative one about, oh, nobody understands what we're doing. It's more about, look at this great, shift that we're able to do with our technology.
Thank you very much. Ted, can you comment on land benefits? For example, reducing landfilling or reducing the hazard level of waste being landfilled. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Apologies. I did see that question go by, and it's an interesting question. I mean, the more obvious answer is around methane generation, and when we're talking in the carbon context, and the avoidance of that methane generation. But I think the question is a little bit broader in the sense that it's getting more towards those perhaps community and societal based aspects. So, while you may be able to quantify things like tonnage and things like carbon, in this example, I think you also want to think about the community-based aspects in particular, because these landfills are operating in communities, and what the benefits would be of reducing the landfilling. The other thought I have on this one is looking back up the supply chain, and the types of things that go into landfills, and how a particular project might influence the reduction of those materials going in the first place, right? So more of the reduce reuse type argument.
Thank you. Let's go to Chris. So can companies from other provinces apply for projects that will be executed in Alberta?
Certainly. I mean, I'm speaking mainly from the Emissions Reduction Alberta perspective, but I believe Alberta Innovates feel similarly in most cases, that we are looking for the best technology solutions regardless of where they come from, but we want to see them applied in Alberta. So where your company is headquartered or incorporated is much less important than where the actual project will be happening, and most importantly, where the benefits will be accruing. So if you are coming from outside the province and applying, we're happy to have you and excited to see what you have to offer us. But make sure, again, like what we said during the tips presentation, was focus on the Alberta context and on sort of what you can do in Alberta more than anything.
Thanks, Chris. Over to Vicky. So often we have projects which are small pilots and the impacts may be small, but the commercial opportunity may be very large from an outcomes perspective. How do you weight the project versus commercial in your evaluation?
Absolutely. That's what I was talking about in the tips, is making sure that there's that clear path to the potential outcomes. So we recognize at the project level, we may not see any benefits. In some cases, it may actually be negative benefits because you're really trying things out. Things may not work. But if you can say that this is the step in the process to see that commercial benefit, and here are the next steps after this, then we can really latch on to that commercial benefit as something tangible. Whereas if that path is missing, then it's harder to accept that commercial benefit as something that we may reach in whatever timeline that is.
Awesome. Thanks, Vicky. Ted, how do you handle it when you're piloting something that is a key enabling component with respect to accounting for the outcomes? Can you take credit for the entire system's impact or just the portion passing through that component, or how do you manage that?
Well, it's a suitably technical question. I'll try and do what I can with it, but I mean, to some degree, it'll be dependent on the program design and how the carbon benefits would be presented and at what level. One way that I have seen this presented, though, at the higher level is by trying to get very specific about quantifying the benefits associated with the project itself, the very specific aspects of the project, but then talking more broadly about the tertiary carbon benefits, or maybe the less certain ones. So a little bit like a GRI Scope 3 type approach when you're looking at the ancillary carbon benefits. I think it's useful to talk about both, especially when we're thinking about what are the broader carbon benefits beyond the project, either within that industry or into other industries, one of the items I mentioned on my slide. So I don't know if that specifically helps the question. It was kind of pointed to a specific element of a project, I think, but that's, I think, how I would approach it.
Okay, Vicky?
I could add to that. It sometimes does depend on a case-by-case basis. So if you are having a specific piece of an overall machine that needs to work, if the machine can work without your piece, then it's harder to claim the benefits of the larger effort. If your piece is very critical in making that whole piece work, then it's easier to assign those benefits. So there's no real clear answer in terms of how we can allocate the benefits. Usually what's best is just to be clear about it, to say, this is my piece, this is its role and overall function, and then propose a way to assign the benefits, and then we can have that discussion. As long as it's clear, usually we can assess it through the process.
Chris, did you want to chime in?
I think Vicky and Ted nailed it, so in the interest of time.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we've got 5 minutes left, so we'll go to the lightning round here. Michelle, when are you going to run your workshop again?
Great question, Brian. I will think about it and let people know.
Okay, good. Chris, how do you handle it when the market for your product is primarily international? So the GHG benefits are not likely to be large domestically, but could be very material globally. How do you account for that?
Yeah, that can be a difficult situation. I will say that I think both of our two organizations are very interested in technologies that have that export potential from the economic benefits side. For us, we are primarily interested in technologies that are going to have that emissions benefit here in the province. So we're certainly interested in your proposal if you talk about emissions benefits elsewhere, but we do want to see those benefits directly in province. So if your technology is really about making a product that you're going to export and it's going to have all these great benefits outside of Alberta, particularly on the emissions side, then maybe ERA is not the best fit. But I mean, it does depend on the specifics of the technology in the project. So it's worth sort of having that discussion with us maybe a bit more specifically, and we can give you some pointers on how do we position it in a way that, you know, Alberta gets enough benefit that ERA can take a look. So it's always a conversation.
Vicky?
I'd just like to quickly identify at Alberta Innovates, we have a funding program through our entrepreneurial investments team that really looks to support Alberta-based companies. And there we're looking more at the business side of things. So the export potential is of more value because it is about growing the company within the province. Whereas our other funding programs like the Water Innovation Program, Clean Resources, are really looking at the benefits within Alberta. So we really need to see that application here.
Thanks. Ted, so in Vicky's slides, she talked about being optimistically realistic. But when people are trying to quantify the uncertainty around commercialization, right? What is a good approach to do that when they're asked for commercialization numbers, but the range of uncertainty can be so large?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea is to simply try to quantify it and state it, and because it adds to the robustness of the overall analysis that you did with your project. And I touched on this a little bit, that risk sections are often not played enough, I think, and they have a very positive aspect in what a proponent can say, in the sense that what is going to be the tendency for that money to go to really good use and to perpetuate in the economy, right? So I think you really do want to spend time trying to quantify those things, and there's lots of analysis tools that out there on risk calculations that you can look at. It's I think it's more about not ignoring it in your presentation and presenting it.
Thank you. Vicky, will reviewers come and see a technology and meet the team, or is this all just done through paper applications?
In general, it's all done through paper applications. We have, in some cases, gone out to visit teams and meet and see the technology, get a better idea of it. Generally, we do that more once the project is approved for funding. But through that brainstorming process that we talked about earlier, sometimes it is necessary to meet with the team, get to know you better, and have those conversations. Some application organizations like SDTC that do a site visit as a formal part of the review process. At Alberta Innovates, that isn't a step in the actual review process.
Thank you. So there were a bunch more questions, but it is 9:59, getting the hook here. So I unfortunately do have to wrap things up. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. We do have a quick poll question, which you should see on your screen here very shortly. And we'd just like to understand if this has been valuable and if it's something we should consider again at our next reverse pitch. So if you could please click on a choice and hit submit. And then shortly we will see the results. And wow, that's really excellent to see. So that's wonderful. A bunch of people were asking about the slide deck and the recording. They will be posted on the websites. For people that had very pointed and specific questions, you can find all of our contact info at our websites, and you're welcome to reach out and ask and have that conversation. I think you heard that today. And so with that, I'd like to thank the panelists for an excellent session and thank all of our attendees, and wish everyone a great Wednesday. Take care.